There's no question that data is the currency of the modern world. It's probably one of the most valuable commodities that we have today in the technology space, certainly. But what happens when there is a data breach and how much does it cost? That's what I want to talk about today. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney. For over 20 years, I've drafted and negotiated a variety of technology-related contracts and litigated failed technology projects in courts across the country. So the financial impact of a data breach has been escalating. And depending on the study that you look at and what factors are used in that study, the average cost of a data breach, at least in 2024, is approaching about $4.8 million, which is a significant jump from previous years. And there are variations, geographical variations, and certainly variations by the particular industry that you're in. In the US, the average cost of a data breach can be $9.4 million. And again, that is going to vary by the particular industry that you're in, with healthcare having the highest costs associated with the data breach, and that is approximately $9.7 million. So, the financial impact that you could experience to the extent you are involved in a data breach scenario is going to be significant. And how does that break down in the real world? Where does that 9.7 kind of fall across the spectrum? And I think you've got to look at different categories, and certainly investigation and remediation of the data breach is going to have a certain cost associated with it. You want to determine the scope of the breach, and then you want to be able to fix the vulnerabilities that caused the breach in the first place. You're going to have some sort of an obligation to notify the people that have been impacted by that data breach. There's going to be expenses associated with providing them with information, and there is going to be legal fees associated with managing the legal fallout associated with that data breach. And what those legal fees are, I think it's going to be hard to estimate in certainly just kind of a hypothetical situation. But certainly you're going to need to hire some sort of law firm or attorneys to respond, to assess the severity of the breach. There's going to be potentially some legal liability that you're going to want to mitigate. So all of that is going to fall under this broad heading of legal fees and notification obligations. You've got to account for the expected operational disruption. So, for example, I have a client that was hit with a data breach last year, and it was significant. It was a ransomware incident. They did not initially want to pay the hackers the money that they were requesting, but their internal systems were unavailable to their employees. They had to operate kind of on a backup system. They were operating with webmail. They were emailing documents back and forth instead of using their servers, their centrally located document depository system. And so all of that created operational disruption, which affects the bottom line. And so the longer that the data breach goes on, the longer that you do not have access to your data, if that's the type of scenario you're experiencing, the more money you're going to have to spend or damages you're going to incur associated with that breach. And in some instances, it might make more sense from a financial perspective, a cost-benefit analysis, to pay to regain access to the data that is being held hostage, if that's the kind of scenario we're talking about. So, I think certainly there's going to be operational disruption, and it's going to cost more and have more of an impact than you expect for it to have. You can also be talking about reputational damage. You look at Facebook. People make jokes still to this day about the way that they manage their data, the concerns they have for their users. You look at Target. Some of these companies that have experienced massive data breaches or data issues, they've lost a lot of reputational integrity. People don't trust them anymore. And I wouldn't expect for my clients to necessarily be impacted by a data breach with that level of severity and those financial consequences. But even if it's a smaller scale data breach, your reputational damage you would have in your particular niche or your particular industry still could be significant, and it could impact you financially for years to come. I think when you're trying to assess how to quantify the cost associated with a data breach, you've got to look at lost business. And you go back to the client that had the data that was held hostage. You look at that scenario, and certainly they were not as efficient during that period within which they were unable to access their systems. They were unable to market, promote, close deals to the same level that they would have had they not been impacted by the data security issue that they were dealing with. And so, how do you quantify that? I mean, I think some of that can be speculative, but in some ways it may not be. I mean, you may be able to drill down and say, look, we lost these deals because we couldn't access our data. So how do you deal with this? How do you minimize the likelihood that you're going to experience a data security issue or a data breach? And I think you've really got to be proactive. You want to have a defensive strategy in place to mitigate risk before they even occur. So you want to have a proactive strategy, a plan for mitigating the likelihood that a data breach is going to occur. You want to have a plan for what you're going to do when it does occur and how you're going to try to recover from that data breach. You want to put key preventative measures in place, which in my view would include strong authentication. You want to utilize strong passwords. You want to have multi-factor authentication in place for all of your accounts. You're going to want to keep all of your software updated. Your operational systems or operating systems, excuse me, all of those, you want to make sure that you're downloading patches from the vendors, that you're up to date on all of the things that you need to be doing to make sure that your software environment is got all the latest and greatest data patches, security vulnerabilities taken care of. You want to protect your sensitive data. You want to use data encryption to the extent that you've got critically important data that is vulnerable. You want to be able to take advantage of antivirus and anti-malware software to protect your systems. I think you want to train your employees on a regular basis on how to recognize threats. You want to make sure that they can avoid phishing emails and other social engineering tactics. And that's just a good strategy for due diligence and employee training. One of my clients, they send out mock emails to their employees that are designed to teach them what phishing looks like, and they remediate those employees that arbitrarily or intentionally click on these baited emails just to make sure that everybody's aware, that everybody's got the right training. And then I think you want to have regular audits of your system. You want to audit your system to identify and address security gaps that may be present in that system. And this is all just part, again, of being proactive. You've got to be also aware of the threats that are out there. You've got to be wary of suspicious emails. You want to be wary of suspicious texts and calls that try to trick you into revealing personal information. You don't want to inadvertently give somebody access to your system. And you've got to be on the lookout for breaches of compromised credentials. You don't want to be dealing with a scenario where login information has been stolen, where there has been a breach of credentials of your employees, and all this can happen incredibly fast, and the consequences can be devastating. So I think understanding what the risk profile is from a monetary perspective, what you're likely to spend, how that's broken down, and then having a proactive strategy for mitigating the likelihood that you're going to encounter a data security issue or incident is key. And then having a robust process for responding to a data security breach to the extent one happens is really the key to success here. If you have any questions about anything I've talked about in this video, feel free to reach out to me at taftlaw.com. I'd love to talk to you and point you in the right direction.